Hello and welcome along. So today we're going to talk about Luna and why the conquest of Luna was so important to the Emperor and to the early Imperium. Why was Luna the first step in the Great Crusade, and what was the impact of that conquest? So Luna is the name of the moon in the 40k universe, and of course the moon is as close to Earth, Terra, as you can get in space. So firstly, simply because of proximity, Luna is the obvious first choice for a target to begin the Great Crusade. Secondly, Luna had a large human population, and the Emperor's goal is to unite all of humanity, and so Luna is an obvious target again because you want to bring those humans back into the fold. He wants to unite them with the humans already under his control on Terra. Thirdly, Luna is a useful position to defend Terra. So if you have control over Luna, you have that little bit of extra breathing room to defend Terra from any would-be attackers. You can install military bases, spaceports, and orbital defense systems. You can install long-range sensor systems, so you can have advanced warnings of attacks, etc. So it's a valuable strategic position as well in the defense of Terra. And finally, and most importantly to the Emperor, Luna was the home of the Selenar gene cults. So these cults were semi-religious, semi-technological cults who really focused on genetic engineering. They believed in fundamental human archetypes, which they believed existed from the beginning of human history, and they wanted to recreate these archetypes. And they did this through genetic engineering and cloning. They would try and perfect humanity through their genetic technology, and once they had created an individual, they kept recreating that individual whenever they died. So if one of their cult members died, they would simply clone them again, and that person would keep the name of that original person but just add a number to their name. And in so doing, they kind of gained a form of immortality. And these clones were more than just genetically identical. Their personalities were identical as well. They were about as close to immortality as an individual can get without being a perpetual. And although their culture was very much influenced by occult practices and symbolism and spirituality, they were very advanced technologically. So much so that the Emperor did admire their technical skill in genetic engineering, and he coveted their resources. He wanted them to work for him because not only did they have a high level of skill, they also had a high level of capacity. And of course, the Emperor is about to set out on the Great Crusade. He needs as many Astartes as he can get his hands on. His facilities back on Terra just aren't big enough to do this. And so although his technology is on a par with theirs, bringing them under his control will allow him to meet the production numbers he needs to build up armies sufficiently large enough to carry out his plans for the Great Crusade. And so all those things combined together means that Luna has to come under his control. Now, of course, because he wants Luna not just for the sake of conquest, he wants it for what's there, for those resources. He can't just obliterate it from orbit. He can't just send an army to assault it willy-nilly, because many of the servants of the Emperor, when sent to war, have a habit of destroying everything that they come across. And so if you really want to keep delicate machinery, highly skilled individuals intact, you have to be very careful when you go about conquering them. And so the Emperor at first tries all he can to resolve this through diplomatic means. He sends various ambassadors time and time again to try and negotiate with the Selenar cults, and he just can't make any progress. They're very resistant to the outside world, and unfortunately for them, their whole society is built around this idea that only they should control this technology and that they need to protect this secrets of creation from the outside world and from what they see as a corrupt mankind. And to be fair to them, that's probably largely true. So they had resisted all attempts from people from Terra to take control of them, and the Mechanicum as well, because they also were quite keen on getting hold of their technology. And so no matter who came to see them, they would always turn them away. So the fact that these latest emissaries were coming from the Emperor of Man, it didn't mean anything to them. It was still the case that no, we don't share our technology, we don't work for other people, we are in control of this and we keep it for ourselves for the sake of humanity. Now, eventually, this got to the point where they were so fed up with ambassadors coming from Terra, from the Emperor, saying, come on, you've got to join us, ramping up the rhetoric, start to issue threats and start to try to apply the pressure to get them to come on board. They snapped and severely mutilated, using their technology, a group of ambassadors, fusing them together into some weird flesh puppet thing and sending them back to the Emperor. So you can imagine the Emperor, on receiving news that his ambassadors have been sent back in this state, was probably slightly annoyed. So he does the only thing he can do. He has to order a military takeover of Luna. But he has to do this carefully. He really wants what's on Luna. He can't just go in and destroy it. It needs to be done. It needs to be done with precision. It needs to be done with care, and it needs to be done quickly and efficiently. So he has to pick the right force to go and do this. So he decides that from amongst all of his forces, the best choice are the 3 legions that we've come to know as the Lunar Wolves, the Ultramarines, and the Imperial Fists. Now, I think straight off the bat, we can say, well, yeah, that makes sense. These are 3 legions that are known for their effectiveness in battle, but their efficiency and their discipline and their lack of unusual techniques and characteristics that some of the other more specialized legions might have that could lead them to messing this up, destroying the thing the Emperor wants most. It's also interesting to note that the Lunar Wolves are picked to lead this, and they deploy their entire legion. Now, at this stage in the Great Crusade, right at the beginning, the legions are all very small in number, except for perhaps the Dark Angels, who having been created first quite near the beginning of the Unification Wars, are much larger than the other legions, but were not used in this engagement. Now, we'll come to why maybe in a moment. So the 3 legions that are picked are still quite small, probably numbering a few thousand, over 10,000 at best each. And so there's not a large force that he's sending. Now, we don't know much about the defenders in terms of their military capability. We know that their technology was at a high level for genecraft, but it doesn't seem like they had created any large armies of genetically enhanced warriors or anything like that. So perhaps they didn't represent a huge military threat. And it seems like mainly their defense was orbital defense systems, gun emplacements, that kind of thing, rather than a large standing army. And so the Lunar Wolves were given the responsibility of organizing, leading this attack. Now, this was before Horus had joined them. So Horus, although found first amongst the Primarchs, wasn't found quite this early. He wasn't far away from being found, but it wasn't quite yet. And so this is an operation performed without a Primarch. But the early Lunar Wolves had already showed themselves on Terra during the Unification Wars to be a very competent and trustworthy force, and had already started to show themselves as leaders amongst the other Astartes, as being that little bit more impressive, that little bit better, that little bit more capable. Now, some of the other legions had developed very impressive specialities that they were better at everybody else than. But the Lunar Wolves, as an all-rounded force, were one of the very top tier already at this stage. And so it makes sense that they were picked for this. And of course, the Ultramarines and the Imperial Fists were renowned for their discipline and for their efficiency. So it also makes good sense that they were assigned to support the Lunar Wolves in this attack, as they could be relied upon to follow orders, carry out the plan, and conquer Luna with as little collateral damage as possible. It's reasonably clear why those 3 legions would be good at this. It might not be as obvious why some of the other legions wouldn't have been a good choice. Now, obviously, there are those legions like the Blood Angels, the World Eaters, that are just too violent, too out of control to be trusted with a job like this. And also, there are legions that simply weren't in the field yet. The Space Wolves, for example, that were not even being used in combat yet. They were still in the testing phase. And in fact, they wouldn't enter the Great Crusade until after the conquest of the solar system. The Alpha Legion, of course, maybe are already around, maybe they're not. Officially, they certainly aren't, and nobody knows about them. And this kind of operation was a bit too large scale for the kind of thing they were doing, which was more that spycraft type of work. It's obviously potentially possible that there were Alpha Legion members operating on Luna, preparing the way for an attack like this, but we just don't know about that. There's no written record of this, and in fact, there's no even any hints in the lore for this, that they were involved in any way. But what about the Dark Angels? I hear some of you say. Given that the Dark Angels were the largest legion and were the most experienced, the most impressive at this time, they had done the most. They were very much the Emperor's favourites at this time. They were leading the way in showing the others this is how to be an Astarte. They were effectively sort of mentoring the other small legions into being proper legion. They had the numbers, unlike most of the other legions, and so they might be an obvious choice. But the thing about the Dark Angels is that they were essentially used to annihilate enemies. They would purge populations. They would destroy civilizations. They were used to eliminate enemies you didn't want people to even know had existed. So the Emperor sent them on jobs where he didn't really care what happened to the people that were there when the Dark Angels arrived. In fact, in many ways, he did care. He wanted them annihilated. He wanted them purged because the things that they were attacking were usually aliens or mutants or people so set against his ideas that the only solution he could see was to purge them. So the Dark Angels were the experts and the specialists in committing war crimes, essentially. They wiped out populations in ways that were too terrible for the Imperial population to even know about. And because of this, they actually developed quite a dark reputation amongst the other legions. Even these hardened fighters, these hardened warriors who'd seen a lot of shit, kind of looked on the Dark Angels with some suspicion, even though the Dark Angels were the ones who were mentoring them and sort of helping them grow into full legion status. They did develop that reputation simply because they did so many secret missions that were secret because of how terrible the things they did were. Not because of any strategic reasons or anything like this. It was just simply the Emperor didn't want the general population to know about how brutal he could be or how brutal his Astartes could be to the right target. Which is pretty extreme when you think about some of the things that were done deliberately so that people would know about what they'd done so that people wouldn't risk the wrath of the Emperor. So these were the missions and the methods, particularly, that the Dark Angels would use that were so abhorrent that you just didn't want people to know you used them. And so that is why he wouldn't send the Dark Angels. So tasked with this objective of conquering Luna with as little damage as possible, the Lunar Wolves set out. And they achieved this extremely easily and extremely skillfully. So they implemented a tactic that would later be copied by many of the other Astartes, which was to perform an assault from space using assault craft that were powered down. So they turned all their power off and would just drift into the target. In so doing, they were much harder for the defenders to detect. So the defense systems on Luna just weren't activated by their ships coming in with no power. They would just drift like either space debris or rocks just floating through space. So they could get too close for the defenders to be able to react before they could be detected. They also used the powered up assault craft of the other two legions, the Imperial Fists and Ultramarines, as a distraction. They launched their ships first and then turned all the power off, drifted in towards Luna, and the other two legions came in under power a little bit later. And so the defense systems suddenly see these assault ships coming in, switch on, start targeting the other two legions, but it's too late because the Lunar Wolves are already too close. They're inside the grid. They start landing and they very swiftly and efficiently take out the defense systems and take over control of them. There's very little detail of actually the ground action, how they actually fought the cult members themselves. There's no real evidence that they had any particularly large standing army or anything. So one they had gained control over the defense systems, really the battle was over, and it is said to have taken only 6 hours to subdue the whole of Luna. Now, having been caught unawares and defeated so quickly, so swiftly, the Selenar Jin cults bent the knee. They gave in, they surrendered. They realized they were at the mercy of the Emperor at this point, and they decided that the best course of action was to work for him, which is odd for a religious cult that is so devoted to keeping the technology away from anyone else's hands, but they put their own lives ahead of their ideology and decided to join him. Now, you could argue that perhaps they just thought, well, this guy's really impressive, the way he defeated us so easily. Perhaps he does deserve to have our technology. Or, on the other hand, they may have thought, well, they seem to have the level of technology that equals ours anyway, because they've seen these Astartes in battle. They are advanced enough in genetic engineering to realize these Astartes are a product of a high level of genetic engineering that the Emperor must have. Perhaps that persuaded them to think, okay, well, we're not really giving him any advances in technology, so it's not actually going against our religious creed. So perhaps that's the reason. Or perhaps they just simply, faced with imminent death, they thought, we've got no other choice. They just decided that they would play the long game and go along with this, but get their ultimate revenge at some point, or some other idea. And in fact, in the future, the elements of the gene cults are reasonably certain to have tried to sabotage the Emperor's children's gene seed with the virus, which actually nearly led to the extinction of the Legion. Their leadership did promise to aid Horus to stay alive. So again, perhaps they just don't have the courage of their convictions. Maybe they just feel like that surviving to aid their conqueror is a bad thing. It's better than them being wiped out and they not existing anymore as a whole, and therefore their knowledge, their technology would disappear and humanity would lose it completely. Perhaps that's their reasoning, and I suppose there's some sense in that as well. What impact did this have for the Imperium, this successful conquest of Luna and the Selenar gene cults? Well, the first and most important impact was that the Emperor now had their resources to use to create more Astartes. And so he massively ramps up the production of Astartes and is able to use those greatly increased numbers to continue the conquest of the solar system, then continue out into the wider galaxy. And without that conquest of Luna, he wouldn't be able to do that so quickly. Obviously, over time, they could have built up numbers using his facilities on Terra. He could have expanded those facilities, etc., over time, and eventually led to the same kind of numbers that he was able to produce. But it would have led to a delay in his plans. And the Emperor had really been thinking about his plans for a very long time, and his timing was crucial. He'd been around for a very long time before the unification wars, so everything is done when he feels it's the best time to do it. And so he decided that this was the time to begin the Great Crusade, and he needed to get out there as quick as he could with as many Astartes as he could. And so it really was essential to get hold of the Selenar gene cult's equipment and expertise to aid in that. The next most important thing is, now he had Luna, he had a place to build massive fortifications, orbital shipyards, huge defense systems, and deep space sensor arrays, which could be used to massively enhance the defense of Terra. And through to the present 40k universe, it's still a crucial part of the defenses of Terra. He was then able to headquarter the Silent Sisters on Luna as well, and they are a very important instrument for the Imperium in dealing with psychers. So they were able to base their black ships in the lunar shipyards. They were able to operate from secret bases underneath the surface, essentially control and use psychers across the Imperium. He was able to use the vast mineral resources of Luna. In fact, Luna had a massive trench, many kilometers wide and deep, dug around its circumference, which the resources out of which were used to build an orbital shipyard as well. And so a huge part of the Imperial war fleet was constructed there. And so you've got this massive increase in ships and Astartes all coming from the conquest of Luna, which greatly speed up the rate at which the Great Crusade can be pursued. Now, in addition to all of this, the Selenar gene cults were in possession of an item which they called the Magna Mater. This was something they had created themselves and was key to their genetic technology. It was highly sought after by the Imperium, although it actually didn't come into Imperial hands until after the end of the heresy, at which point it was used to store perfect genetic samples of the 20 Primarchs. And this would later go on to be used in the creation of the Primaris space marine. So the benefits of the conquest of Luna really can't be underestimated. What do you think? Do you think there was a better choice to conquer Luna than the Lunar Walls, backed up by the Ultramarines and the Imperial Fists? What do you think the motives of the leadership of the Selenar cults was in deciding to go along with aiding the Emperor? Was it just purely survival instincts? Did they actually come to believe that it was reasonable to support the Emperor? If you want to know more about the early days of the Lunar Walls, why the conquest of Luna gained them the name the Lunar Walls, check out the video I've done on that already. And otherwise, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe and share, and I will see you next time.